Well, good afternoon, everyone, and it's my pleasure to be here with my friends and fellow premiers, Premier Higgs and Premier Ford from Ontario. As Ontario, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan, we have great stories to tell when it comes to climate change. Ontario has made a significant emission reduction over the last number of years of 62 megatons. New Brunswick's climate change plan reduces emissions by 40% of their 2005 levels, and in Saskatchewan, our current plan contains a commitment to reduce emissions in the electricity sector by 40% below our 2005 levels in the year 2030. We believe that we can do this without unnecessary taxes that burden families, businesses, taxes that really do little in actually reducing emissions directly. Saskatchewan's plan of prairie resilience achieves our emission reductions through targeted investments in innovative technology in our emitting industries, without impacting our jobs or impacting the Saskatchewan economy. Because our responsibility to address climate change also comes with a responsibility to protect our economies, keeping jobs in our province and keeping our sustainable industries competitive. Today we are joining as premiers and provinces to look towards the coming decade and beyond to advance the development of zero-emission small modular nuclear reactor technology. Implementing small modular reactors will provide meaningful action in reducing our carbon emissions in electricity production while providing affordable baseload power to our communities and to our industries. In addition to providing a reliable, a sustainable, and affordable baseload power supply, this technology has the potential of creating high-quality jobs and local economic development opportunities in communities where existing transmission infrastructure already exists, or further in rural and remote communities that currently rely on higher emissions power production methods. Now, earlier in my statement, I mentioned that our current plan in Saskatchewan would see a 40% reduction of our emissions in our electrical generation sector. This could be achieved by adding carbon capture and storage to our coal-fired generators or replacing those generators with combined cycle natural gas generation. Alongside increasing our renewable generation capacity, so our hydro, our wind, and our solar, from a current 25% capacity to a further 50%. But by incorporating small modular reactor technology in place of natural gas or in place of coal generation with carbon capture and storage, that 40% emissions reduction target that I mentioned would actually move to 70% emissions reductions by 2030, 80% by 2040, and a complete 100% elimination of Saskatchewan's electrical generation emissions by the year 2050. This is positive for Saskatchewan. This is positive for Canada. And it's taking real action in addressing global climate change. To this end, I am pleased to join with Premiers Ford and Premier Higgs to sign a Memorandum of Understanding to support the early stage evaluation, the planning, and the commercialization to further develop small modular reactor technology options for our provinces, our nation, and the world. Together, our provinces can achieve a bigger and bolder objectives and seize the opportunity to play a very major role in the development and the deployment of small modular nuclear reactor technology in our nation. And in doing so, Canadians working together, like we are here today, from coast to coast to coast, can play an even larger role in addressing climate change across Canada and throughout the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. And I have to tell you, my friends, it's great to host all the premiers here, and two of my closest allies and friends, Scott Moe and Blaine Higgs. And I'm looking forward to sitting down with all the premiers tonight, actually, and tomorrow, and we're going to have a real productive meeting for each of their provinces and Canada as a whole. Today, I'm excited to announce Ontario, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan have signed a Memorandum of Understanding. Our provinces have committed to collaborating to advance the development of small modular reactors, better known moving forward as SMRs. This technology could bring great benefit to the people of our provinces and our country. Small modular reactors could generate clean, cost-effective, and reliable energy for both on-grid and off-grid generation, helping our rural and remote communities as well as sectors like mining. And this is an example of what you saw, kind of the propane almost crisis, pretty close to a crisis. That would eliminate that for people living in rural communities that the propane was running out. They also have tremendous economic potential when it comes to export opportunities, especially as these technologies are adopted across Canada and all around the world. We know Russia, we know China, they're playing in this area as well, and I think there's a real opportunity for Canada to be one of the true leaders. The numbers are astounding. According to a recent report, between 2030 and 2040, potential value as for SMRs in Canada alone is estimated to be $10 billion. Globally, that number is $150 billion. Simply put, it's a win-win. Ontario has a lot of expertise in this area and a very innovative group of companies that we look forward to working with, along with New Brunswick and Saskatchewan. I'm going to pass it over to Premier Higgs. And again, it's great to see both of you here. And I know you had a little tough time flying in this weather.
We did. It was a little balmy weather in New Brunswick, so I was surprised to see snow here. But yeah, thank you, Premier Ford. And Premier Moe, it is a great event to be here and to be collaborating on this important issue. About 3 years ago, New Brunswick signed agreements with two innovators in this field, Moltex and ARC. And the two representatives are here today from those companies, and I think maybe many of you have been talking with them. So it was kind of a joint venture at looking at where the technology would go and what options there could be. So it's kind of, you know, many people may be thinking, well, why nuclear, why now? If you look at the spectrum of energy and how we're going to provide and meet the demands in a zero-emitting industry, it's not going to happen through wind and solar, and it's got to be technology like this that is advanced and improved. And currently the technologies that are being promoted here that we're collaborating on are technologies that are very zero emissions, of course, which we're all well familiar with, but certainly also very low pressure, very high safety factor, very easily transported around as a global solution. And as Premier Ford mentioned, certainly we have a history here working together with nuclear reactors in our respective provinces for the last 40 years, and a high safety record. You know, it's important for us to look to the future and the demands that are actually there and what can actually meet those demands. And that's where certainly this comes into play. I do have my Minister of Energy here is Mike Holland. He's been working on this file since we became government a year ago, so he's no stranger to that. It is a technology that is outlined in the federal plan, so it's certainly looking at options. So I think the more that we look under the hood of this, we'll see this not only as a solution in our respective provinces and in Canada, but globally. And I'm just excited to be part of this with my colleagues here, to make this happen and have an effort here that's going to drive it over the top for our country and our respective provinces. So when I think about this particular venture, it's showing how we work together. It's showing how provinces come together on initiatives that are important to the future. And we all respect the challenges in the climate change world that we're in, and it's addressing it head on through real solutions. And that's what's excited. We're in a transition economy, and we're trying to maintain an economy while meet our standards going forward as we must. Le Nouveau-Brunswick adopte les mesures nécessaires pour faire partie de ce changement. Et ce temps de ces mesures vise à trouver de nouvelles et meilleures façons de fournir une énergie chaude, fiable et sans émission, afin de répondre aux besoins aujourd'hui et au demain. I'm just excited to sign this MOU. I think it's just a sign of things to come. I've worked well with the respective premiers here today that I'm sitting with, and I certainly am, you know, I'm honored to be with them and be part of the solution. Thank you so much.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you.
I would now invite the premiers to sign the Memorandum of Understanding.
Okay.
Sign away.
Ready?
There you go. Well, that's great.
We're good? We're all set?
That's great.
Thank you very much.
Great opportunity.
Great, thanks.
Great, thank you.
very much.
Excellent. So why don't we hold this up for the folks to see here? And there you go.
And Blaine will take some questions.
Okay. And I guess we'll take a few questions.
We'll bring that question to the mic. Once you do my follow-up, and you can identify yourself and the question.
Good afternoon, Premiers. Joyce Napier, CTV News. Thank you for taking our questions. I'm wondering if you have a timeline to when these facilities could be up and running. How many years are we talking about here? And also, if your other premiers that you will be meeting with tomorrow, are they, or some of them, on board?
Well, the other premiers, the more the merrier. They're all welcome. But I'll pass the other first question over to
Blaine, you may have a little more to add to the timeline. My understanding is it fits relatively well with our timeline of reducing emissions as a nation by 2030 and some of the targets that we have signed on to at the Paris Accord. In saying that, there is some time to select locations. It takes some time to select technology, and it'll take some time, obviously, to procure that particular technology. So I think it's in the range of 5+ years before you would see a technology like this up and running, likely even a little longer than 5 years. But we would be hopeful that it would be less than 10 years before we were able to get a technology operating here in the province of Saskatchewan. So this is a memorandum of understanding for us to work together on streamlining that site selection process, streamlining some of the work that we're doing now together on the technology selection, as well as ultimately and potentially even looking at a joint procurement if that opportunity should come along. So this is the early stages of this technology, but it's a very exciting technology when I'll speak to Saskatchewan specifically in what it can do for us in reducing our emissions profile in the province and our electrical generation sector, ultimately to the goal of 100% reduction by the year 2050. Anything to add to that, Blaine?
I guess the only comment, I think the timeline certainly is within the 5 to 10 years. We have in the two technologies I spoke of earlier, one has been certified to go the next phase, and the other will be certified, I think, this summer. But so we're excited about that movement, and we're seeing that this is bigger than just our provinces. It's a national strategy. It will require national support. I mean, if we go back to years ago and when the CANDO technology was there, well, this is the next phase of a modern technology that meets the needs of today.
Well, looking ahead to tomorrow, I'm just wondering if you could give each one of you your #1 priority for tomorrow's discussions.
My #1 priority is to come to a consensus on a number of issues on behalf of all Canadians, as well as on behalf of providing that guidance from coast to coast to coast to what we have now as a minority federal administration.
And I think for New Brunswick, certainly the outstanding issue that's been there for a while is the softwood lumber agreement and the tariffs that have been imposed upon our industries. And certainly I think BC and ourselves would particularly be in that issue severely. We have industries now that are slowing down or potentially shutting down. So it is coming to a crisis level. The other issue that will be, I would say, is very important is the crisis we're seeing in healthcare. We've talked about the aging care and the challenges we've had, and you've certainly probably reported on some of the incidents in a recent hospital that we had that was over full. The other is the modern issues like the mental health issues, the crystal meth issues in our youth, and suicides. I mean, things that are nationally important that are hitting all of us.
And for Ontario, it's always economic development and jobs, interprovincial trade that can put right down to the bottom line of the GDP, $75 billion for the country. Healthcare is always an issue for all the provinces. When we had the COF meeting in Saskatchewan, we agreed on the 5.2 escalator, but now we're dealing with another issue on healthcare with the pharmacare, but we'll be discussing that as well, along with a few other items. And I just want to thank Premier Moe for allowing us to meet here in Toronto. And it's going to be a real productive and great meeting. It's always good to get together, and there's so many other things that are discussed that, you know, just in general conversations that we have with the other premiers.
There'll be much. I'll just add to that, and thanks to these two individuals as well as some other premiers in light of and how this meeting came together here in Toronto tonight and tomorrow. Was reaching out of these two premiers as well as a few others in light of the divisions that we saw on the federal election evening. And is there a place for premiers to come together, come to a consensus on a few items on behalf of all Canadians, and come to that consensus to provide that direction for the steps forward?
Premiers, Brian Lilly, Toronto Sun. If I can ask you about the technology here. I know that both New Brunswick and Saskatchewan have high levels of coal in your energy mix for electricity. I believe Saskatchewan's 45 to 50%. New Brunswick is about 25, I think. But Ontario has none. So I'm wondering what this technology would mean for each of the provinces in terms of either emissions or economic development if it comes through.
Well, for us in Saskatchewan, we're about 29% coal of our mix right now. We have been reducing that, incorporating natural gas, incorporating some renewables, both by import as well as wind and solar contracts that we have been working on. So we're about 29% coal. As I said, what it means for our province as we move forward, we have a 40% emissions reduction target in this industry. That is by using coal with carbon capture and storage, which we have utilized as a baseload power supply, or replacing those facilities with combined cycle natural gas. We would align with that some additional renewables, hydro, solar, and wind. That would get us to a 40% reduction by 2030. If we are able to replace some of that baseload power with some small modular reactor technology, that really starts to amplify those numbers to 70% reduction by 2030, 80% by 2040, 100%, a total elimination of the electrical emissions in Saskatchewan by 2050. Most definitely have a huge impact on the emissions profile of our electrical generation sector. That's why we're here today, and we're very excited. I'm very excited to be here representing our province with these two gentlemen so that we can advance on one another's successes in this area.
And I guess in New Brunswick, we have one coal plant, and to the point you raised about the current capacity or percentage, this would not only replace that in the time frame that we're talking to take that plant down offline, but I think it also the economic opportunity here to develop a technology that can be used worldwide. And I think that's where we're partnering here to combine our efforts, because we both have nuclear footprints, we both have nuclear plants, and there's a capability to expand. I mean, not long ago we were looking at a second reactor at Point Lepreau, and this would replace, certainly we would be building for the future in other areas. So it could be a major export opportunity and an economic generator.
Well, Brian, for Ontario, definitely economic. We could be a world leader. I've always said we have some of the brightest men and women in the entire world here, and some of the brightest people in the world when it comes to this at OPG. I believe some folks from OPG are here, and they're doing some research, and I'm 100% behind it. And we look at it, if we can do $10 billion in Canada, and there's a market of $150 billion worldwide, along with helping the economic side when it comes to mining, getting power up to some of the mining towns and the very remote towns, we could would be a world-class leader in SMRs.
Joyce asked about #1 priority from each of you, and you all gave several. I think I heard about a dozen between the three of you. So how do you actually
welcome
talk
to
about, welcome to talking to politicians. How do you actually get that much discussed with 13 of you around the table? Because I talked to a couple of other of your colleagues this week, and everyone's got a pile of priorities. Premier Ford, you called this, you said for national unity, but it seems like everything in the kitchen sink is actually up there.
Well, #1, it has to be, in my opinion, in sending a clear message to the rest of the world. In Canada, yes, we have disagreements, and yes, we're always going to respect other provinces' concerns, especially out west, but we're a united country, and we have to send that message out to the world. I always say when there's uncertainty anywhere in any region, it's not great, but I can tell you we were very, very productive when we met in Saskatchewan, and Premier Moe did an incredible job. Yes, we all have our wish list, but he's an expert at narrowing that wish list down and start focusing on 3 or 4 items that are urgent right now. And we'll, I'm sure he's going to be able to do that starting tonight and tomorrow. And it's also about relationship building too. Building a relationship, working with the other provinces, getting to know the other premiers. That's the reason I flew into Montreal the other night. I could have seen Premier Legault here, but sitting down one-on-one, it's no different than business. You have to build strong relationships with other regions and other premiers and respect their concerns.
I think you said it you very well in your question, that we all have a number of priorities, but you're right. It was initiated by the discussion with my colleagues here on national unity. But having this meeting prior to meeting with the Prime Minister in January gives us a chance to focus. Yeah. And we may come with individual items, but at the end of the day, we say, okay, what are the main items we're going to bring forward to the PM? And this gives us that opportunity.
And I would just say, hey, welcome to the chair's seat. With respect to narrowing this conversation into a few items that we will be able to find consensus on across the nation on behalf of not only the people that we represent in our provinces and territories, but really on behalf of all Canadians. I say this, I've said this a number of times before, and I'll say it again here today. We not only are looking for a strong action when it comes to the environment in each of our jurisdictions and across the nation, we're looking to continue with a strong economy in each of our jurisdictions. And in the same way that we respect the diversity of our people in this nation from coast to coast to coast, we'll work very hard to respect the way that we create wealth in those communities across this nation from coast to coast to coast. And that is what this meeting is about. There are many differences between our respective jurisdictions, but there are things that we agree on. This meeting today, precipitated not only by a phone call from these 2 gentlemen, but a few others, is going to focus on precisely those areas where we can come to consensus on behalf of, as I say, not just the people in Ontario and New Brunswick or our respective territories and provinces, but on behalf of all Canadians collectively.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Premiers. Hey. Laura Stone, Globe and Mail. Thanks for taking our questions. My first question is for Premier Higgs and the others, but I have 2 separate versions. Premier Higgs, after the federal election, you said the country has spoken, people voted for it when talking about the carbon tax. Are you now going to institute one in your province? And for the other premiers, Premier Moe and Ford, is the fact that you're not bringing this up tomorrow a recognition of the fact that this is not as politically unpopular as you once believed it to be?
Well, if it was coming my way first, I'll comment that, yeah, I have put an offer forward in relation to a carbon tax for New Brunswick, and it puts in the basically meeting the federal requirements, and we have an output-based pricing model that we put forward previously. So we haven't got a response yet, but I'm optimistic that will get approved. But I think it's important to recognize that we all have our own issues in that regard to deal with, and so while in some cases we may move one direction or another provincially, we focus on the bigger items that we have collective interest in. But I also want to reemphasize that I am still involved in challenging the jurisdictional rights of the federal government to impose this upon us. So I'm with my colleagues there in that regard, because where does that go from here on other items? So we need that answered.
I would just say this from Saskatchewan's perspective. We were in the Supreme Court of Canada on this issue in particular with our federal government. We intend on seeing that case through for a number of reasons. First and foremost, we believe that the climate change policy falls within the jurisdiction of the provinces. We believe that is also the place where that initiative should be if it's going to be as effective as it can possibly be. Hence today's announcement, where we can, over the course of the next 30 years, potentially have an opportunity to reduce our emissions in the electrical generation sector to 0. This is the opportunity we have, not only as people from Saskatchewan, but as people from Canada, to work together to develop our innovation, to share that innovation with one another, and to share it with others around the world, to address what is not a Saskatchewan challenge, not even a Canadian challenge, but is a global challenge of climate change. And that is our way forward. That is how we have always led as Canadians in this great nation. With respect to the carbon taxation, or the federal imposition of carbon taxation from the federal government, we feel that's in the provincial authority to impose that. We've challenged that at our Court of Appeal in Saskatchewan. We've taken that to the Supreme Court. The other reason we are running that through is if the federal government is going to, our opinion, overstep their bounds with respect to imposing this tax on Saskatchewan industries and hardworking Saskatchewan families, the concern would be that the next step could be stepping over their bounds, if you will, with respect to education, for example, and some of the policies that may come from the federal government in education. The federal government could then overstep their bounds when it comes to language rights, for example, which often are very much within the provincial jurisdiction. So that is some of the concerns that Saskatchewan has on the broader issue. But we have always said that the provinces and territories should be able to put forward their climate policies that are most effective in their respective jurisdictions, understanding again how we generate wealth in this nation is very, very different. Very, very different in Atlantic Canada than it is in Ontario, than it is in the northern areas of our region, which again is different than British Columbia, which again is different than Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba in the interior.
Well, Laura, I couldn't have said it better, actually. But it's, you know, we have a strong environment plan. We take climate change seriously here in Ontario, and we just don't feel the federal government should punish the people for meeting their targets. We're going to hit our targets of 30% reduction by 2030. Our goal is to exceed those targets, and we just feel like we're being punished. So we're going to move forward on challenging this, and we want to come up with new areas, new technologies, like, for example, today,
right,
the SMRs, that is clean energy, and that's what we're going to focus on in Ontario.
Thank you. Just on another topic, as Conservative premiers, leaders, we're hearing a lot of prominent Conservatives federally call on Andrew Scheer to step aside before his April leadership review for the good of the party, they say. Do you think that he should be given the chance to face the leadership test in April?
I'll speak first with respect to that. If Andrew Scheer or any leader is going to step aside, that would be a decision that each of those leaders could make. From Saskatchewan's perspective, the Conservatives won all of the seats in our province. From a national perspective, the Conservatives had a higher popular vote than any other party, and they're up in their seat count relative to where they were last election. So if any of the leaders are going to step aside, that would be their decision. I'd also say that each of the parties have a process in place for replacing their leaders in the event that should occur. In this particular instance, I would say that the members of the party will have a say, like they do in any other party.
And again, for me, I believe there is a process in place. I feel the same way. When you mentioned there's a review in April, I think it should just unfold the normal way. It's unfortunate that it becomes such a, I guess, an open public event. I think everyone that goes into these roles, they do it with the best intentions, and they work really hard at it. And when I guess the criticism comes out following election, you know, elections are won and lost, and there's a lot of different reasons. So for me, let the system unfold. There'll be leadership in April, and let that decide. And Mr. Scheer should certainly make the decision on his own. I think he will make whatever decision is best for both the country, for himself and his family, and the party.
And Laura, that decision will be made by the federal party, federal members, and I just want to wish them all the best. And as I've always said, Andrew Scheer is a good man, in my opinion, and I wish him all the best.
Good evening, Patrick Belrose from Journal de Montréal. My question is for Mr. Premier Ford. I'd like to know, since we're talking about clean energy, are you still considering the offer from Mr. Legault to build dams in Quebec to provide the hydroelectricity to Ontario?
Well, I don't think it's just Premier Legault. I think it's Newfoundland too, with Gull Island up there, and The problem is, the reality is, we have too much energy right now. We're selling Quebec energy in the winter and peak times, and we just have too much right now. If we didn't have enough, if the situation was different, I'd love to find cheaper energy anywhere. So, but not as of right this. But I'll tell you one thing: they're two excellent salespeople. Man, they don't give up. They're on to me constantly. But I give them credit. They're doing their job.
But you'll be renovating those nuclear centrals. So basically, are you moving forward with the renovation of the nuclear centrals? Is there any possibility for
We are not right now. But boy, he has you as a good salesperson too. Good for you. That's good.
So I'll consider the door shut on that possibility.
As of for now, yes. We have too much energy as it is.
Just one more question, if I may. What came out of the meeting with Mr. Legault on Friday? And did you bring up the question of the ban on religious symbols?
Well, you know something, I respect the choice of the people of Quebec. That's up to them. There's no place for that here in Ontario. He knows that. We talked about areas that we have common ground on, especially healthcare, economic development, and job creation. So there's that conversation came up, and again, just building a good relationship with Premier Legault. We get along absolutely fabulously, and to be very frank, and I know the other premiers will agree, when we were together in Saskatchewan, we got along incredibly well, all 13 of us, and you have to have a little bit of fun when you're together as well, and have a good chat. And again, it's about building relationships, and that's what we're doing. But we get along extremely well, all the premiers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Premiers, Adam Heuris with the New Brunswick Telegraph-Journal. Premier Higgs on SMRs, wasn't the goal for New Brunswick's perspective always that the first SMR would be at Point Lepreau? There was talk there about a site selection between the three premiers. Are you trying to convince them to do this at Lepreau?
Well, of course I will, but there will be, I think, enough to go around. You know, we started this, so when MB Power got involved in this process and looking at these technologies a few years ago, it was providing an economic opportunity, and Point Lepreau was cited because we had permitting there for a second reactor. So the opportunity was there as an economic potential for New Brunswick. But having said that, and what I said earlier, the potential here is not only nationwide, but we need to work together on it, because it's a worldwide solution. It's a global solution that can come right out of Canada, and it's bigger than any one province. So for me, it's not about, oh, can I keep this in the corner of New Brunswick, albeit we certainly need some economic growth. It's working together with my colleagues here to do the best thing for not only nation building, but in terms of exporting global energy solutions.
And to that point, the two startups in New Brunswick that are working on this technology, their big sell has been talking about a supply chain, the creation of a supply chain in New Brunswick. Ontario largely has that supply chain in place. Does this partnership raise any concerns about creating new business in New Brunswick?
So who are you advertising for here?
No one.
No, it doesn't create concerns. It creates opportunities. And in order for this, because as we move forward in any technology, it's great to be in, and I'm hoping we can bring some synergies to the table here, because we're down the road here a ways with this technology, and I am sure, I'm very convinced that doing this strengthens our ability as provinces, as a nation, to be more in the world market for export and economic development.
Hello, Patrice Bergeron, La Presse Canadienne, Canadian Press. My question is for Premier Ford. How was the dinner on Friday night with Mr. Legault, and what were the issues discussed?
You know, something was great. I get along extremely well with Francois. We just we hit it off, just like you hit it off with these two great guys right beside me, and we understand that we're neighbors. We have to work together, and we share a lot of common ground, especially on economic development and job creation, also on economic immigration as well, that how his economic immigration works, because I'm always saying we need more people, and I asked him how his economic immigration works. At 60%, they get to put it forward, and they get to put the applications online, and companies choose from there. And I think it's great. You learn a lot off each other. And of course, he was trying to sell me energy all night and doing a good job. But you know something? I never shoot it down, because you learn so much by listening to other people and some of the ideas that he had. So you know, I learned a tremendous amount on what he was proposing. And the common ground with everyone is healthcare. You know, that's going to be discussed over the next day or so, and we'll have more to say about that once we finish our meetings tomorrow.
So about hydro. So we've been proposed many times, cheap, reliable, green energy from Mr. Legault. So what makes the difference? What makes it more interesting now to go into nuclear? The price?
Well, you know something, right now, well, first of all, that's technology, and I think that's the real, at least for Ontario, would look under the economic development side. We could export this around the world, be one of the leaders around the world. We have some of the brightest people in the world, in my opinion, at OPG and in that arena. And as I was saying, the Chinese and Russians are playing in that arena as well. We always want to jump ahead of the other countries, and it's great to have three partners here. And I won't be surprised if other provinces want to jump on board and work with us.
I think you will see other provinces start to have this conversation that we are maybe beginning here today. And I would just address, we import some renewable power in the way of hydro as well in Saskatchewan, and it isn't an either-or conversation. We need a certain amount of baseload power, whether that be hydro, whether that be SMR, which are the cleaner forms of that baseload power. We currently, over the course of the last number of years, as other areas of the nation have been providing that power through coal-fired power, of which, when we developed that resource, Saskatchewan has a 300-year supply of coal. It seemed like the sensible thing to do at the time, and the affordable thing to do at the time. As the conversation of sustainability and emissions has developed over the last number of decades, that view is starting to change, of course, and we are going to be either phasing into coal with carbon capture and storage, replacing that coal with combined cycle natural gas, which would be a similar emissions profile as CCS, or looking at incorporating SMRs and other opportunities that we may have for further development of our renewables, of which in Saskatchewan's case we have expanded to about 25% of our capacity, which raises the broader discussion as we look ahead in Canada at our electrical generation about, one, the emissions profile of it as in general, and you mentioned hydro as being a clean power supply and a relatively cheap power supply in many cases. Our power rates are starting to differ across this nation, and in the broader conversation about continuing to be competitive in all of our jurisdictions, this is you know, part of the discussion as we move forward to ensure that not only are we pushing down our emissions profiles, but we're not further disadvantaging some areas of the nation that have chosen a different path half a century ago or wherever that may be. That is respecting, as I say, not only the diversity of our people, but respecting the diversity of how we create our wealth, how we create our power, and ultimately how we move forward as Canadians in communities across this great nation.
Great.
Thank you.
I just want to thank everyone and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. That's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I'll just leave these here, though.